All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this PokerCoaching.com webinar. I am your host today, Coach Brad Wilson. As you'll notice, I'm not Jonathan Little, but I am Coach Brad Wilson, and my specialty is cash games. And so today we're going to be talking about 5 hacks to crush online 6-max cash games. That is my specialty. I've played online poker for, the past 10 years primarily, and I run a coaching for profit. All of my coaching tends to be in the realm of cash games. So in today's webinar for poker coaching, I'm going to talk about my specialty, as I mentioned, right? The old cash game arena. And we're going to talk about, why bidding online 6-max cash is not just about, playing tight, hoping to run hot. It's about good fundamentals, right? It's about finding solid exploits, being technically savvy, and making really good decisions. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is fundamentals, right? That word. What do you guys think fundamentals means, or what are fundamentals to you as it relates to poker? And I'm kind of asking the chat right now. You guys gonna have to get on it, I'll start and then kind of let you guys fill in the gaps. So fundamentals, as it relates to poker, fundamentals are basic, essential, or foundational principles of a field of knowledge, right? And essentially, in poker, the way that you know something is a fundamental, they're the things in which you'd be able to observe if you watched any poker game around the world, played at any skill level. They would be commonalities that you would see. Just doesn't matter if you're watching 2 3-year-olds play heads up or 2 high rollers or 9 high rollers, playing a 25K buy-in tournament, right? To me, that's essentially what the fundamentals, the fundamental aspects of poker are. And, we have GTO as a fundamental principle. We have pre-flop betting, calculating odds, calculating equity, solid understanding of pre-flop ranges. I do believe all of those are aspects of, fundamental aspects of playing strong poker. The game itself, I would say the actions that you take, right? The available actions. So checking, betting, raising, calling, folding. Those are fundamental aspects of poker. You'll observe, doesn't matter really the format, doesn't matter where you're at, skill level of the players involved, etc. Those are things that are fundamental to this game. So, relative position is another one. So in position, out of position, the actual positions, button, small blind, big blind, etc., depending on the game that you play. But we're talking about 6-max online cash, which is typically going to have a button, small blind, and a big blind. And then, pre-flop sizings, post-flop sizing schemes, lines that players take. All of these things are, fundamental aspects of playing poker. And so in today's webinar, you're going to learn pre-flop mechanics and some 3-betting tips. These are fundamental strategies in poker, some GTO post-flop strats, and my personal number 1 key to finding exploits in online 6-max cash. All right, so the first is, position, right? Position is everything. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. And I think it's something that is worthy of meditation. It's worthy of thinking about, investing a lot of energy into figuring out how to leverage position, positional effects. So what are some things that you get to do in position that you don't get to do out of position, right? Considering position, the benefits, the cons of being out of position, just the value of relative position. I think it's something that, even, high-level players, even players that have been playing a very long time, don't invest enough energy in thinking about, the value of position, right? In this second bullet point here, most people are too loose in early position, too tight in late position. The way that I think about this, right? If you think about how the game is fundamentally created, you realize that it's a game of making decisions with imperfect information, right? And your goal is to make as many plus EV decisions as you possibly can. So one way to make better decisions is to make decisions with more information. And when you're in position or when you're in late position, right? If everybody folds to you in the cutoff, you've learned something, right? That the player in the low jack didn't know, right? That the hijack was going to fold. Or if everybody folds to you on the button, you know something that the low jack doesn't know, that the hijack and the cutoff didn't have a hand worthy of playing, right? And so with that extra information, as villains fold to you in later position, you get to open more hands, right? So yeah, like, and most players tend to be too loose in early position and then too tight in late position, right? So essentially, the more information that you have, the more hands you get to play, right? And the more hands that you get to play profitably. And the less information that you have, if you expand into like full ring live or 9 max, the fewer hands that you would get to play, especially from early position, right? And now let's look at a few examples. So here are some RFI charts. And you can see that, the low jack armed with no information in online 6 max cash. They have no idea the strength of anybody's hand. They only get to play 17.3% optimally. I guess they could get to play all the hands if they really wanted to, but they're supposed to play 17.3% of hands. And you can see the range is, like 5s and 6s are a mix, 7s plus, all the suited broadways, all the suited aces, suited kings, king 5 suited plus, king 7 and king 6 are, a mix. And then some offsuit broadways, ace 10 plus, king jack off, king queen off. And that's it from the low jack. And now if you compare that to the button raise first in, because the button, as I mentioned before, they've learned something. They know that the low jack, the hijack, nor the cutoff had hands strong enough to play. Therefore, they're going to get to open 43% of hands. And those 43% of hands are going to include all the hands in that chart, which are a lot of hands, right? It's all the suited queens, all the suited kings, all the suited aces, most of the suited jacks, a lot of the suited 10s, 9s, 8s, all the medium suited connectors, all the pocket pairs, ace 3 off plus, king 8 off plus. It's a lot of hands, and we're only looking at the percentages here, but, combinatorically speaking, this is a lot of combos compared to low jack on the button. So, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of extra hands that you get to open from the button as compared to the low jack. And I would also, strongly argue that you should invest a lot of energy into committing your preflop strategy to memory and maintaining frequencies while consolidating mixed strategies to pure. So in this case, when you look at the low jack RFI on the left, the king 7 and king 6 suited, I would just consolidate those to opening king 7 suited and folding king 6 suited, right? There can be really extreme negative consequences to messing up your frequencies. So first and foremost, I would want to maintain my frequencies. And that's going to lead to me consolidating mixed frequency strats. So hands where you're supposed to do something 50% of the time, 2 hands, into just opening that one hand, like the king 7. Because inevitably what happens when you have a mixed strategy, either A, your bias is going to be that, the last time you opened king 7 off, you want to stack, and so you want to open it this time, or the last time you opened king 7 suited rather, you got stacked and now you don't want to open it, right? And either one of those biases are going to influence your frequencies. Because strategically speaking, you only want to invest a certain amount of big blinds with your range, or your strategy does, when raising first in from all these positions. And when you raise too frequently or too infrequently, you're either investing too many big blinds or too few big blinds. So again, spend a lot of energy in memorizing your preflop charts. I know that it's a lot of work. It's not very fun. It's definitely not very sexy. But it is relatively straightforward and relatively simple. I think as human beings, we tend to undervalue what we deem as simple. But I believe that you should do just the opposite, especially as it relates to fundamental strategies. Because when a thing is simple, that means there's a path to mastery for anybody. And there's no excuse really for getting it wrong, right? You don't have to be a wizard to memorize pre-flop strategy. It just takes effort. And I think that, anybody's capable of doing it. And so not investing that energy is a really, really critical mistake. And, for all of your 6max pre-flop chart needs, PokerCoaching.com has all of those. You can look at, you can study those, commit them to memory. If you're really interested in crushing 6max online cash, this is a pivotal, necessary first step that you just absolutely have to take. From the chat, Stu Undergarments, one of my favorite YouTube names of all time, asked about what about using a randomizer. I think using a randomizer is fine, and I think that's reasonable. However, when you're memorizing preflop grids and you add in the element of needing to randomize and also needing to memorize the split of the hand itself, you're going to make committing your preflop strat exponentially more difficult, right? It's going to add in a lot of extra complexity that's going to make it way more difficult to manage than if you just memorized, pure open strats. Next up is 3-betting. So 3-betting, hack number 2, 3-bet with a linear range often. So linear range is going to be a range made up of your best hands as well as thin value hands. So just, imagine a line. It's linear. They get progressively better. And when facing a raise, only call when you're on the button or in the big blind. So only cold call when you're on the button or in the big blind, specifically in online 6max cash. Again, if you want to thrive in the streets of online 6max cash, you need to be fundamentally strong. You can't make these kinds of pre-flop errors by, flatting, being the first to flat a 2-bet from the small blind or from the hijack or from the cutoff, right? And here are 2 grids. So 3-bet with fundamentally sound ranges. So you see the small blind versus button range. Again, this is going to be one of the looser 3-bet formations because the button, as we mentioned earlier, is raising with about half of the combos that they get dealt with. So 3-bet frequency is going to be 13.2%. So quite high. Pocket sixes plus, ace jack, ace queen off, king queen off, ace king off, all the suited broadways, and then a bunch of suited aces, and then some suited nines, king 9 suited, jack 9 suited, 10 9 suited, smattering of like 6-5 suited. And then over here on the right, you have cutoff versus hijack raise. So they're going to be 3-betting 9.2%. And even though those percentages look relatively close, 13.2, 9.2, that's a 4% difference. And 4% in this case is quite large. So, you're 3-betting something like 75% of the hands when you're in the cutoff facing a hijack raise than when you're in the small blind facing a button open. This is going to be due to you have less information when you're 3-betting, so you don't know what the players behind you are going to do. So there's still the button, small blind, and big blind left to act. When you're in the small blind, there's only the big blind left to act, so you have more information, as well as the cutoff opening a tighter range, right? So cutoff is only going to be opening, they're going to be opening less hands than the 45% on the button. Something like, not sure off the top of my head, 30% of hands, somewhere around there. Let's see. Have a question about high rake environment. So how do I tighten my range in a high rake environment? Tighten from the offsuit broadways or from the suited king queen stuff? High rake environments are not actually something that I've invested a lot of energy into. fully exploring and fully understanding. It's actually somewhat embarrassing, but yeah, I haven't regularly played the micro stakes or the very small stakes. I would say that off the top of my head, you would start by chopping off the lowest equity hands that you have, right? So the lowest value hands that you have, and kind of go from there. But it's going to depend on the stake that you play. It's going to depend on the rake effect, because the rake effect playing different stakes is going to be more severe to less severe. For instance, the rake effect at high stakes online cash is going to be relatively minimal when, they cut like $4 from the pot. If you're playing like 10, 20, no limit, that's going to be like 0.2 big blinds. Whereas they cut $4 out of the pot and you're playing 50 cents a dollar, that's 4 big blinds. And so that's a much, much bigger deal. So yeah, it's really going to depend on just the extent of the environment in which you're operating. Okay, so now after this, we got stop defending the big blind so wide. So hack number 3, a lot of students, they come to me, they're used to playing live cash games, even tournaments with an ante. In online cash, generally, you need to tighten up your big blind defend, especially as mentioned in the high rake environments that some of you play in. So yeah, your defense strategy also has to be dynamic, right? So it needs to be based on the preflop open size that you're facing. So along with knowing your preflop strategy, like the back of your hand, along with just knowing your frequencies and that sort of thing, your defense strategy also needs to be dynamic, right? Because based on the size of the preflop open, that's going to really determine the hands that you continue with, because they're setting the price. So essentially, your big blind defense strategy will change significantly, whether the open is minimum, for instance, or a pot size open, which is like 3.5 big blinds. So again, like, you have to first understand the fundamental part, your preflop strategy. You got to know what it is. You need to know like why it is the way that it is, so that when you face things that are outside of your expectation, for instance, a pot size open preflop, maybe a 4 big blind open preflop or a 5 big blind open preflop, you can respond dynamically and correctly on the fly. Here's going to be, the preflop charts for the big blind defense. So as you can see here, your strategy facing a low jack open is going to be substantially different, once again, than your strategy facing a big blind open. So when facing an open from the low jack, you're going to 3-bet 4.3% of the time. When you face an open from the button, you're going to 3-bet 11.8% of the time, right? So significantly more when the button opens compared to low jack, and that's because of this. Low jack is opening 17.3% of hands. Button is opening 43% of hands. So quite a significant difference there in range makeup from those two positions. You're also going to call way less often facing a low jack open than you would a button open. And in general, I would not only focus on big blind defense, because I think, big blind defense is exceptionally important. Being able to play very well out of the big blind is really going to make it can make or break your online win rate. If you think about it, the big blind is a position that you play the most frequently, right? Because you can't get out of playing the big blind. You must play the big blind. You must play the small blind. And then in general, you play the button a lot. So those 3 positions, investing a lot of energy in how to play the button, small blind, big blind, will yield the most fruit as it relates to making upgrades in your game. And I would think about the button specifically, or the big blind, specifically, and your 3-bet range, because the big blind is the one position where you have a little bit of mixed incentives, right? Where you have this situation where you face an open from the button and you're in the big blind and you can close the action and see a flop, right? You can realize your equity. And the temptation of seeing a flop and realizing your equity generally leads to under 3 bets from the big blind. And, it's kind of across the board from everything that I've researched, observed, and studied, just human beings tend to under 3-bet from the big blind. So I would invest a lot of energy into learning how to 3-bet appropriately from the big blind, as well as learning your appropriate 4-bet defense strategy after you 3-bet from the big blind, right? So what do you do when villain 4-bets after you 3-bet? Hack number 4 is going to be to quickly tag players, especially in an online environment. This is, something that is just critical to your success. You want to be deploying a strategy that will be successful or has the best chance of success versus individual player profiles. And so being able to identify the player profile that you're playing against in the moment is, I can't really overstate how critical it is. The faster you can identify the players, the faster you can exploit them, or the faster, you can respond appropriately, right? If you identify that a player is a reg, then, and your pre-flop strategy, then you know what to do when the reg opens from position X, Y, or Z, right? You know what happens when the reg 3-bets you from position X, Y, or Z. You know the range composition. You know what it's supposed to look like. So then post-flop, hand reading becomes a lot easier because you know the possibilities, right? Quickly tagging players so that you can respond accordingly and respond with the correct strategy and have a better idea of what their strategy is exceptionally important. This is, a concept that I talk about a lot in the advanced cash game course that just made and that PokerCoaching just dropped, I think, last night. Just undervalued. Got to be able to do this very, very fast, especially in an online environment when figuring out villain's profile within, a few hands can make a really big difference as to your potential earn rate against that player. Some high priority data points are going to be pre-flop raise size. So if you study your pre-flop strategies, you typically know that typically like the open size is going to be 2x to 2.5x, especially from low jack to cutoff. If you see a villain, like I said earlier, opening pot or 4x, I would be very suspicious that they are a white belt or a recreational player. My language is white belt personally because I think it makes sense, and I kind of have a small jiu-jitsu obsession right now. And when you go through the course, the advanced cash game course on PokerCoaching, you'll see how get a little glimpse of how obsessed I am with jiu-jitsu, breaking out the kazushi words, the Japanese words for imbalancing within that. So 3-bet sizing is another one. Typically in position 3-bet sizing should be 3x, out of position generally be 4x or 11 big blinds, 10 big blinds, somewhere around there. White belts tend to 3-bet to smaller sizes like minimum, for instance, or just way too big. Also 4-bet sizing, there's a big difference between, a 4-bet sizing to like 21 to 23 big blinds and then a 4-bet sizing to like 27 big blinds, right? And then, precise bet sizing post-flop, right? And I think finding or figuring out where villains are being inefficient using poor post-flop bet sizing selections will lead you to be able to identify whether that player is a recreational player, whether they're a regular, pro, etc. And a lot of being able to understand or identify precise bet sizing is understanding, knowing what to expect, right? Like what bet sizing is preferred here? Why is this bet sizing preferred? That will lead you down the road to being able to identify the white belts a lot faster and a lot more accurately. I see the chat is, filling up. So I'm going to circle back and answer all the questions and go through the chat at the end of the presentation. So number 5 is going to be, exploit, right? Against players that underdefend, you need to bluff early and often, right? They fold too frequently. They don't meet minimum defense frequency, bluff a lot. Against players that overvalue marginal made hands, you need to go big for value, right? And not bluff rivers. If you're not going to generate folds or you've taken a sizing scheme that eliminates the folding targets that you had in mind, then you should not bluff the river. Right, which yeah, those kind of go hand in hand. And when you have a spot where you're like, oh yeah, I should not bluff the river here because the range is too strong, that is also a spot where you should go incredibly big for with your value. And all of this, leads me to number one, key to exploits in 6-max cash games. Consistency is king. So exploiting white belts better than your opponents, that's what gives you a massive win rate in online 6-max cash. Stand your ground, battle regs, just understand the principles of GTO, the principles of exploits, but really maximally exploiting white belts faster than your opponents. That's going to just jumpstart, skyrocket your online 6-max cash win rate. And generally, this is just because the loss rate of the white belts is very, very high. And so you want to capture as big of a percentage of their loss rate as you possibly can. So you need to work hard to quickly identify those players at the table while also thinking deeply about their strategy. Like, how is this person playing? How are they thinking? How are they structuring their bluffs? How are they sizing their value? And then you need to figure out how to counter their strategy to the max. The way that I think about it is that you need to know the strategy of your opponent better than they themselves know their own strategy, so that you can find the holes, so that you can respond quickly, and then so that you can exploit them for the max and capture more than your fair share of their loss rate. Some homework here for you 6-max grinders. Tag every hand versus a weaker player that you play for 1 month. Instead of focusing on playing GTO, grade yourself on how your exploits are working, right? So collect some data, act on your theory in game, and then track and see how are the results. How are you doing in those spots where, you're doing what you think is right based on this villain strategy, or you're deploying a counter exploit or an exploit based on this specific villain strategy. Track how you're doing. It's very easy to get biased. It's very easy to, have a spot where you think villains are going to overfold and they bluff catch with a hand that you don't think they should bluff catch with that one time, and then completely nuke your strategy and be like, it just doesn't work. I'm not winning. It's not doing well. You really need a larger data set than one, right? You need quite a bit of hands and quite a bit of feedback before you can make that determination. And again, you're a human being, and I know that's the failure point of humans, right? That we abandon ship, we make broad sweeping generalizations and presume that they're true, that villains are just they're not overfolding here, they're calling too often when we get bluff caught a couple times. And the reality is you need a big sample size. You need hundreds of data points in order to really see and understand what's going on. As a recap, 5 hacks to crush online 6-max cash games. Positions everything, and understand the fundamentals of poker, how they work. Know them like the back of your hand. 3-bet with a linear range often. Don't defend the big blind so wide. Do understand your big blind 3-bet strategy inside and out, as well as your response facing 4-bets. Quickly tag players, so be able to correctly, swiftly identify the player profile in question that you're battling against, and then exploit the living bejesus out of everybody that you encounter in online 6-max cash. Break down their strategy, understand exactly where they're making a mistake, understand where they're price insensitive, and just smash them for the absolute maximum, right? And to end my presentation and then go to the chat, going to talk about this course that I worked on with Poker Coaching, the advanced cash game course that dropped last night, mastering exploits in 6-max cash games. These are the names of the lessons that I created. I have to say that this building out my portion of the advanced cash game course took a lot longer and was a lot more difficult than I actually thought that it would be when I first started. I ended up learning a lot about poker, just really growing my own game and improving as a poker player as I went to build out the slide decks and build out the presentations. There was lots of false starts. So I have like 8 or 9 slide decks that are mostly built out that will never see the light of day because it just wasn't working. It wasn't as good as I really, wanted it to be. Like I really wanted to create something of high value that made an impact in your poker journey and your journey through online 6-max cash games specifically. So, the second lesson is the birth of exploits. This is me, talking about where exploits come from, why exploits exist. And then the third, again, I mentioned Kazushi earlier, which is attacking an imbalance or creating an imbalance in your opponent's strategy. So we go through a bunch of ways to attack the imbalances that you observe at the poker table, being able to identify those imbalances, being able to attack them, and how to quickly tag players, both regs and white belts, typically within 10 to 15, 20 hands, something like that. Just very, very fast, quickly tag those players. And then we have some plug and play exploits, right? Like, so the first part of my portion of the course was teaching you how to think in terms of exploits, right? Like, how do exploits work technically? What do they look like? How do you find more? How do you think about exploits? And then in these last 2 lessons, these are plug and play pre-flop exploits versus white belts. So again, this is, capturing more than your fair share of their loss rate very quickly, very easily, and then some reg exploits as well, right? Because guess what? We're human beings. The game tree has just almost an infinite number of, nodes on it. And every single node is a potential failure point. There's millions and millions and millions and millions of different nodes. And because of that, we're all human beings. We're all fallible. Regs make mistakes. Regs are extremely exploitable. Recreational players are even more exploitable. And so, the last lesson in the advanced cash game course is going to be on reg exploits, plug and play reg exploits, mistakes that I've observed in various player pools. Just pretty easy peasy ways to increase your win rate and essentially automatically attack the average white belt or the average reg strategy in your player pool. And the advanced cash game course, it's at PokerCoaching.com/Black Friday. It is free with a poker coaching subscription. So if you join Poker Coaching Premium during Black Friday, you'll get free access to the course. Again, my portion of the course is quite a small portion. It's about 4 hours or so. Which again, it took me multiple months to come up with, those hours of content that I made. And you got Rampage, you got Chris Brewer, you got Jaffe, you have Saliba, you got Jonathan Little, all of those guys also bringing the heat, coming in with just giant portions that make up this advanced cash game course. It's really just privilege and an honor, to be associated with these guys and to be able to provide y'all who are watching on YouTube right now, with this content that will make an impact in your online 6-max cash game for sure. And again, that's PokerCoaching.com/Black Friday. You'll get free access if you join Poker Coaching Premium to this course. And with that said, I'm going to go to the live chat now and see what's going on. Answer all these questions in here. Sasquatch says that studying preflop charts can be sexy. Just depends on what you're wearing. That's a really good point, Sasquatch. Jan or Jan says, I very much struggle with post-flop play. What's the best way to learn post-flop? I find the range construction by myself, like JL. I find constructing ranges by myself, like JL advocates for homework, very helpful. What is my tip? The first tip, that's kind of a loaded question, right? This is a really, really broad question of all of post-flop play, but, I would think about poker strategy, why poker strategy exists, and what the game of poker actually is, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are the mechanics of poker. When you look at a solver output, ask yourself, like, what's going on here? How did the solver reach this conclusion, right? Because ultimately, your goal is to think like a solver. It's to think in terms of mathematics. It's to understand the basic principles that drive action and behavior in different sizes when you're playing poker. And once you kind of understand those fundamental parts of, poker theory and poker strategy, then you can start thinking more on the fly. You start seeing the bigger picture, which gives you a much better idea of the decisions that you should make post-flop in game. Stu says, do I think it's profitable to apply the quite polar 3-bet strategy that is presented in these charts? I do, Stu. I do. Scott Ingram says, I struggle defending against a 3-bet from the button with small middle pocket pairs. I know odds are 7-1 hitting trips, but also know button range is wide, so I defend continuation bets a lot. That is, it's a tricky spot, right? It's going to depend a lot on, your opening position, as we mentioned before. If you're opening the cutoff versus opening the low jack, the button's 3-bet strategy, their range will shift and change. But again, all of this is rooted in, understanding what the button's 3-bet range is supposed to look like after opening from those early positions, so that you have a good idea of range interaction on the board, right? How many top pairs do they have? How much trash do they have? How many backdoor flush draws? How many straight draws? How many overpairs, etc., right? And when you know that information, then you have a much better idea. You know that information, and you pair that with pot odds. You can have a better idea of your equity on the flop. That's another thing that I would do too, by the way, to improve your post-flop understanding. I would do a lot of equity calculations, right? And an equity calculation is basically asking, like, what is the value of this hand relative to my opponent's range, right? Like, what share of the pot does this hand have right now against my opponent's range? And just hitting those over and over and over again, where you realize, oh, this hand has 45%, a 45% share of the pot, and villain bet half pot. So, I only need 25% equity to continue. I've got 45, pretty relatively, straightforward continue in that spot. Matthew Kagan confirms Cash Game course is live on Poker Coaching right now. There you go. What sample of hands do I think is good to accurately check if you beat a game or you ran good? Tough question. Really hard to say. Tens of thousands, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. Again, I think like this is a very tricky conversation, a very tricky question, trickier than it might appear at first glance, because the makeup of the game that you play in is going to be a big determination of the win rate. So how many recreational players are in the game? And then there's also like, what's your level of performance when you're playing, right? Because you could actually be a winner in a game normally, but show up in some sort of emotionally compromised state where you're just kind of on tilt and playing badly, and you don't have a win rate in that game in that particular moment. So for me, I would play a stake that my bankroll allows, focus on playing well, focus on playing with intensity, focus on improving every single session that I play, right? Because realistically speaking, like, you should never know your win rate. And I say that because over 100,000 hands, if your win rate is 3, right? 3 big blinds per 100, hopefully, as you played 50,000 hands, your win rate increased over that last 50, right? So then if you were to chop that and look at the last 50K, okay, maybe my win rates on average in this last 50K hands, something like 4 or 5 right now. But as you're progressing and getting better, your win rate should also be going up as you're improving. So yeah, it's really difficult to know what your true or actual win rate is. And I think ultimately I would just focus on performing at the best level that you possibly can, right? Understanding the fundamentals, just doing all the things that, I've kind of talked about ad nauseum. in this presentation. And those are the things that you can control. And, as they say, control the controllables, right? James P says, do you have to be a subscriber to access the course? You do have to be a subscriber to access the course, James. So PokerCoaching.com/Black Friday. Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Kagan, saying 4 hours is a ton of content. My portion of the course was for online play. I do believe there's a live portion of the course as well. Paul? Final question. Do I think it's worth getting PIO or GTO Wizard for regular 20 no-limit play? I think villains don't play similar to the solver responses, so I wonder if I'll mess it up in game. I probably wouldn't advocate for that. And in general, I would advocate for using solvers to better understand how the game of poker works, not as a tool to try to memorize a strategic output and then apply it in game. Because, ultimately you want to understand how this game works so that you can make good decisions in real time against the specific opponents that you're playing against. And the strategy that your opponent uses is going to heavily influence a solver output. So, you could be trying to follow a solver output. In general, again, you're a human being, you're biased, so you're probably going to mess it up anyway. And that will lead to you getting exploited without you really understanding why you're getting exploited or why you're not winning. And B, when villain strategy changes, you need to know how to adapt dynamically, right? Like sometimes you'll look at a solve and it has a donking strategy, and sometimes you'll look at a solve and it doesn't. Whether or not that sim has a donking strategy or doesn't is going to change the preflop raiser's strategy, right? Like that's just the reality of it. These are big unknowns that you just never get to know when you're playing poker in real life. It'd be great if you could, grab your opponent and kind of just do a deep dive and ask them about their strategy in every single spot. And, when you bet the turn, like what does your 70 c-bet strategy look like? Like, do you split sizes? Do you like overbet? Do you have a small size on the turn? Do you have turn leads, in these specific scenarios? But yeah, they never say, I try pulling them to the side and asking them all those questions, but they never give up the goods. So yeah, you need to really understand how the game of poker works. That is the ultimate in-game thing that you should be striving towards. Matthew Kagan says, why is King 5 suited favored over King 7 suited from low jack for RFI? You got to ask the solver gods here. I don't actually know the reason why, King 5 would be preferable over King 7. If I had to guess, I would say that King 5 blocks 3 bets from Ace 5, or blocks, maybe some suited connector 3 bet. Actually, the suited connectors don't make sense because the 7 would block it as well. So yeah, probably just blocks Ace 5 from 3 betting you from the players who are left to act, because Ace 5 is typically one of the primary 3 bet candidates. Any common qualities that the most successful members of my stable possess? Yeah, I mean, they're determined, they work hard, they're coachable, they listen, all of those things. Those are the commonalities, right? And to be honest, the most successful players that I coach, that I interact with, I enjoy being around them. I root for them. We share the same values. We share same life philosophies. And when you share the same values, similar values, life philosophies, it's just much easier doing business with people. It's much easier working with them. You root for them. You work harder for them. And they work harder to learn. And they work harder to grow. So yeah, those are kind of top level. Yes, I am Owen Wilson's brother. Luke Wilson. I'm the third least famous Wilson brother. Solver is not necessary I don't think it's necessary to study post flop. Poker players have been studying post flop since well before the invention of solvers. So you can still learn post flop strategy. study to hand review and playing, I'm not exactly sure. I think that depends on the human being in question. Some people, and it also depends on your definition of studying, right? Like, for me, just when I think of studying, I think of like being in a classroom and writing things down and reading out of textbooks. But I think you should make studying fun. I think you should have a network of people that you bounce ideas off of, that you discuss poker with on the regular. I think essentially making study fun makes it to where, it's not like a chore. It's not something that like you have to do. You want it to be something that you get to do, right? Like a privilege, like something like a treat. I get to like study poker at a high level with my friends. And I think that when you approach study in that way, you're always going to do enough of it, right? Like you're always going to explore that curiosity. You're always going to be drawn in. And I think that's really a big attribute to the most successful poker players that I know. They're just fascinated and curious about how this game works, which allows them to study just almost infinitely without ever getting bored, because it's not work, it's not torture, it's fun. They're trying to understand something that is, innately exceptionally difficult to understand. James P says, my biggest leak is not believing they have it. What's the best way to overcome that without going the other way and over folding? Again, think strategically, right? Think about the spot that you're in. Think about the range makeup. Think about their potential bluffs. Think about their potential value. Ask yourself, what are the pot odds of this situation? How often do I need to be right? And then come to a rational conclusion. Not believing they have it is a very abstract thought that who knows how to even, dissect whether you're right wrong term or wrong long term, how far you're off, where you're off, all of those sort of things. So like you want to root your decision making in tangible, concrete data points and analysis, and stay away from the abstract, because when you root it in tangible analysis, that gives you the opportunity to do better, to upgrade your way of thinking, to understand what you're thinking about incorrectly, what you're missing, what data point you're overvaluing, what data point you're undervaluing, and etc. Adjustments from normal 6-max cash to, fast fold 6-max cash, part of my course. It's not part of my course, Sebastian. Follow-up by Sebastian, would I recommend to play rush poker? I mean, I think it's to each their own. I personally am not a massive fan of, the rush poker format, the Zoom format. I think like the thing that you miss with fast fold format is you're not able to quickly identify the white belts. You're not able to quickly identify the player profiles that are acting in an anonymous environment. Now, in a screen name environment, I think, you can. So yeah, in the anonymous pool, I would be hesitant to play Zoom. But in a named pool, it's going to be a little bit tougher, but yeah, I think it's fine. In a few sentences, what is the goal of poker when you sit down for a game? How should this affect the way the rest of the game is played, thought of? My personal goal is just to play well. It's to analyze the information correctly, make decisions to the best of my ability, perform at a high level, stay focused, pay attention, just make the best decisions that I possibly can. And if I have decisions that are on the cusp, if I have decisions that I'm unsure about, capture that uncertainty and then research it off the felt. This is my personal goal of poker, but I think that goal could change based on where you're at, what your objectives are, that sort of thing. But good question, Braden. All right. I think that's actually, I made it to the bottom of the chat. Poker Robot says, is it okay sometimes to play your hand blind and see if you can read the table? Yeah, I think the table generally, it's going to say something like America's Card Room or Ignition. But yeah, you can play your hand and try to read the center of the table. I think it's good. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think there's much value to be gained by doing it, but you could do it if you want. How do I process all the info online with only a short time limit? James P. Practice, repetition. It's been my life for 20 years. So just pure repetition, seeing millions and millions of hands, analyzing hands, prioritizing data points, all of those things. Just been there, done it a billion times. And that's how I personally process the information. Yeah, so I think this is going to do it for this webinar in Online 6 Max Cash. Again, pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. Yeah, just lots of energy invested into my portion of this course. I haven't seen the others. I imagine that they're really, 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 really good. I'm suggesting that, my wolves and the members of my community specifically watch my section of the course, because again, it was quite impactful to myself, which means that I genuinely believe that it'll make an impact in your poker career and be genuinely helpful when you're in the 6 Max streets battling. So may as well get it on Black Friday when it's on sale and while it's brand new. Since we got no more questions, thank you all for watching. I appreciate your time and energy, and I'll see you sometime in the near future.